You would be turning in your Bible to Daniel. We'll be talking about Daniel today, studying about Daniel and his three friends. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, I think was one of their names. If you want to remember that. So when you think about Daniel, you know, we kind of know the story, but when you think about Daniel, where are we looking? Who are we depending on? Do we depend on ourselves? Do we depend on someone else? Do we depend on the government for things? Maybe we depend on our bank account for many things, our retirement account, retirement plan. But what about looking to God? And I want us to look at Daniel, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and look at those and see where they looked. What did they look at? So as we start this idea of Daniel, if you look just to learn a little bit of history about Daniel before we just delve into talking about what happened to Daniel and his friends. But look in Daniel chapter 1 and verse 3. Now here it says 3 through 7. It says, "And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability to in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans." So they wanted these kids to grow up and to learn that were smart and could teach them things. So he wanted to put them in the king's palace and appoint them to do certain things there. But look at verse 5. It says, "And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank." So that he got to eat the king's, whatever the king would eat. These children would be able to eat the same thing as the king and be nourished in the same way that the king was. So nourishing them for 3 years. So he spent 3 years just feeding them and taking care of them, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah. They were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. So they didn't like their name. Daniel's name was it meant God is my judge. I didn't write down the names of what Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah meant, but they all were godly names. They had God in their, they were meaningful in a godly way. But they didn't want that. They didn't want them to have those kind of names and be in the palace. So unto whom the prince of eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego. So he changed all their names, and just as you think about this name of Daniel, like I said, I didn't get the rest of the names and the meanings, but Daniel's name has changed the Lord of the straitened treasure. Maybe he's the Lord of the treasure that the king had. So he changed their names, and they wanted to change their names to honor idols and to honor other things other than honoring God. And Nebuchadnezzar changes their names to remove God from their life. They were removed from their homeland. They'd been changed physically. They were punished. They were isolated and young and impressionable. So you could just imagine these kids that were maybe around 20 years old. I mean, maybe you don't call them kids, but they were taken out of their country and put in a place and they wanted to change their minds, to change their way of thinking. But when you look at 2 Kings 24, you can understand a little bit why this is happening to Daniel. And I guess if I use Daniel's name, I should use Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah. I just know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But anyway, I might use the wrong names, but you know what I'm talking about as we go through the study. But when you think about why this is happening, You can think about this in 2 Kings 24, in the days of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is one of the kings. King of Babylon came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years, and he turned and rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and the bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servants the prophets. Surely at the command of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. So why is this happening to Daniel and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego? Because the sins of Manasseh, because they shed innocent blood in Jerusalem. So many things happen to us as we go through life because of somebody else's sin. You might have a sin of a drunk driver driving down the road and run into somebody. And it's not your fault that if your child or your baby or maybe your husband and wife got killed, it's their fault because they were living in sin and wasn't striving to follow godly things and God's law. But anyway, we see this happening to Daniel and his friends there. So what did God think of Daniel? We're going to read this in a minute, but well, not this verse because this is in Daniel 9. But look at Daniel 9 and starting in verse 20. And I want you to notice what God thinks of Daniel. It says, "And while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, had presented my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God. Yea, whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, an angel, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me and talked with me and said," okay, so this is what the angel told Daniel, "I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved." So that's what God thinks of Daniel. He thinks of him as he loves him very much. And look at 10:10. It says, again there in verse 11, he says, "O Daniel, a man greatly beloved." And then again in verse 19, "O man, greatly beloved." No, this is what the angel thought, or this is what God thought of David. And this angel was sent to speak to, I said David, to Daniel. So we know God loves Daniel very much, and we'll see that through. And you can, just by look at what he was doing in chapter 9, he was speaking and praying and confessing his sin and the sin of the people. Why wouldn't God think a lot of Daniel? Because he was doing those things for sure. So we notice those things about Daniel. There's two things in history seem to be going on at the same time, from what I understood. But and then I was reading King Nebuchadnezzar. I think maybe been the king before King Darius. So I don't know. Maybe they were kings at the same time over some different little areas. I could never find a good answer to that question. But we know this. It wasn't very long in time, and you can notice that through here in Daniel 2:48. It says, "Then the king made Daniel great and gave him offerings in great number, and made him ruler over the land of Babylon, and chief over all the wise men of Babylon. And at Daniel's request," here's his friends, the king gave Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego authority over the business of the land of Babylon, but Daniel was kept near the king's person. So you see these four friends. Daniel took care of them. He took care of them by appointing them and making them high up in the king's in authority in the king's under the king. So here in Daniel 6, I want to kind of look at both of these stories kind of at the same time. I didn't put some dividers in there. So keep your thumb on Daniel 3 and keep your thumb on Daniel 6, and we're going to kind of switch back and forth. We'll read a little bit of Daniel 3 and read a little bit of Daniel 6. But we're going to notice Daniel's friends, and they're going to be thrown in a fiery furnace. You remember that story? And then you'll read in Daniel 6 where Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. So we'll see both of those stories kind of unfolding. Whether they were at the exact same time, I don't think so, but they were pretty close to being around the same time frame, maybe within a few years or something like that. So here in Daniel 3, it says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, and the judges, and the treasurers, and the counselors, and the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of this image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So he built this huge idol and built this and put it there in that plain of Dura there. Verse 3 is, then the princes and governors and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, and the flute, and the harp, and the sackbut, and the psaltery, and the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, and all kinds of music, and the people and the nations and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So you just imagine, and we're going to see let's read Daniel 6, 1 through 3 here. And here it says, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. But then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So just imagine the trouble that you could get in as you appoint this person, this foreigner, to being over all these 120 princes. Those 120 princes, no telling how long, had been there and worked their way up to the position they were in. Those 120 princes were spread out through the kingdom, and they were able to give account for the revenue and the money that the king would bring in. And Daniel was the chief of those 120 princes. I mean, you consider, when you think about it, just today, appointing a president that nobody likes, or it seems like nobody likes, what kind of jealousy goes on? What kind of backbiting and talking and that goes on behind their backs? Lots of it. So we see that going on here with Daniel and just with Nebuchadnezzar. Who thought up all those things that the Nebuchadnezzar had come up with, and building that image and setting up this law that they had to bow down and worship that golden image. So you can see a lot of trouble coming forth as we look at these 2 stories unfolding. Well, here we see, you can see in the picture, you can see many people bowing down to that golden statue. And just as Daniel did all along, as we'll see later in Daniel 6, he's praying. He's praying to God as he always had done before. Well, let's continue here in verse 8. It says, back in Daniel 3, it says, wherefore at the time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews, they spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Building him up. Look at that talk how they talked to the king. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, and the dulcimer, and all the kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down that worshipeth, that he should be cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. You know, King, there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Here you go, people stirring the pot, talking about men that are there ruling with them. Set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So you see these Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You see them not doing, and you can see there in the picture, you see those men on the side there not doing what everybody else is doing, bowing down to that image. Well, let's look back at Daniel and what was going on there. In Daniel 6 and verse 4, it says, "Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find none occasion nor fault." You know, when you think about looking at a person and you know, when you think about people that are not Christians looking at you, that's kind of what we have here. We have people that are not godly looking at Daniel, and they can't find nothing wrong with him. So they're gonna create some things here. Look at how the story unfolds here. In verse 5 it says, "Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever." You know, the same kind of thing we had over there, Nebuchadnezzar. Didn't they say the same thing to him? King Nebuchadnezzar, live forever. So same kind of build up to the king, just making him feel good. In verse 7 there, all the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, and the captains had consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. So if you ask anything of anybody else other than the king, where are you going? You're going down to the lion pit. You're going to throw it in there and be fed to the lions. In verse 8 it says, "Now, O king, establish the decree, sign the writing, that it be not changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not." You know, it wasn't that they couldn't change the law of the Medes and Persians, but they didn't want to change the law of the Medes and Persians because it was embarrassing to them. It was embarrassing to the king for them to go back and change something that they had already decided. In verse 9 it says, "Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree." So we see here a lot of trouble going on in the kingdom. We see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is fixing to be in a hard place. And we see Daniel is fixing to be put in a hard place as well. So let's look back at Daniel 3 and 13. So we remember what was going on. That they had this law set up, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were not going to bow down and serve the golden image. And here in verse 13 it says, "Then Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer," I mean, he's going to give them another chance. Here's another chance. You will just fall down and worship them, and we'll let you go. But anyway, in verse 16 it says, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king." Now, that's pretty straightforward talking. I mean, they didn't even beat around the bush. Just think of the faith they had to have had to talk like that and to speak to the king. like that. I mean, they're talking to the king and telling him the way it is, pretty much. In verse 18, but if not, be it known unto thee, king, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So they are not gonna worship the gods that the king set up. Now let's go back to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6 and verse 10, right? We were where we were, I think. It says, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, so he knew that this law was set up. And it's not something that he was going to just pray just because there's a law and he didn't want to do what the king said. He had always been doing this in the past, as we already seen. There in verse 10 it says, he knew the writing was signed. He went into his house, and his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. That's what he's been doing. He didn't open his window so everybody could see him. His door window was already open. He's not doing anything different than he was doing before. In verse 12 it says, then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? You know, they're playing like they're going into the king. And he's saying, hey, didn't you make a? They know he made that law because they were twisting it around and behind the whole thing. So the king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Then answered they and said before the king that Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah, regardeth not thee, O king, nor the decree that thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. He's not just disobeying you for 1 time a day. He's disobeying you 3 times a day. Oh, king. I mean, you could just imagine them standing before the king and telling him this story. And so we know here in verse 14, the king loves Daniel. We'll see how displeased he is with himself. Let these people swindle him into making these other decisions. But hey, let me put this other picture up there. Yeah, you can see evil conspiracy and corruption and deception all going on behind. We saw that in Daniel 3, and you can see that going on here in Daniel 6 also. But look here what the king did. In verse 14 it says, then the king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Could you imagine the king trying to figure out, what can I do? I can't change the law. I don't want to change the law. It's going to be so embarrassing for me. What can I do to make this right? Then in verse 15 it says, then these men assembled unto the king, and see, they just weren't going to let it go, right? They assembled unto the king, know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king established may be changed. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said to Daniel, look at what the king thought of Daniel here. And Daniel, there in that verse, it says, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. I mean, the king had no doubt that Daniel's king would deliver him from this den of lions. So they brought a stone and laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet. You know what a signet is? It's like a ring that had a bunch of engravings in it, and they would put wax, some kind of wax seal upon it, and they would do this on letters and many other things. But they would wet this, make this wax hot, and he would put his seal on this, and if it was tampered with, he would know it. And so they wanted to make sure that nobody, I guess, whether they knew Daniel would be rescued or not. They wanted to make sure it wasn't tampered with. They wanted to make sure somebody didn't come and rescue him. Okay, let's look back at Daniel chapter 3, here in verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury and formed of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You see different ideas of rulers, how the ruler, the king Darius, how he acted against when Daniel was thrown into jail. And then you see Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury and upset that they wouldn't bow down to this idol that he worshipped. But therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. So they're taking this furnace and they're going to heat it 7 times hotter than they've ever heated it before. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, the fire was so hot that whenever they got close to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in, it killed them. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake, and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Oh, they answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. So he's like confused. There's 3 men in there. He's how many he put in there, and there's somebody else in there with them. Let's turn back to Daniel 6, verse 18. So Daniel was, Daniel was thrown in the lion's den. He was the signet. It was closed. The signet was put on the door. Then the king went into his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. He couldn't sleep all night. He was worried about Daniel and what would be of him the next day. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. When he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel, and the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest, continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel to the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent his angel, and has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. So we see God sending an angel to protect Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We see God sending an angel to protect Daniel from the mouth of the lions. Let's look back at Daniel 3. Verse 26 there, it says, Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the mouth of the burning fire and furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire, the princes and the governors and the captains, the king's counselors being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was as the hair of their heads singed. Neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. I mean, you can't even get anywhere close to a barbecue pit, and you smell like barbecue. They were inside the fire. No smell of fire had passed on them. Then King Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that every people, nation, and language speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Now, just look how God took care of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And look at the example. I mean, look at, there was somebody that didn't believe in God. They believed in idols. And after these three men were delivered, he believed in their God. Let's look back at Daniel. Daniel 6:24, I believe. So then the king commanded that they brought those men which had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Them, their children, and their wives, and the lions had the mastery of them, and break all their bones in pieces, and or wherever they came at the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote unto all the people, and nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius, in the reign of Cyrus Persian. So we see these three men that stood fast. They were not going to do what the people wanted them to do. Even though all this conspiracy, this corruption was going on, this deception, they stood fast in doing what God wanted them to do. You see, think of their faithful devotion they had. No matter what trial they were going through, they looked to God. We see here the pictures of the men as they were sending them off to sentencing. You just imagine those men walking in. They knew they were going to walk in and see Daniel praying. They probably went up there just to find him there so they could have him sentenced. Here you see a couple of pictures of a possible furnace. You can see the three men in there. Could you imagine Daniel standing there in the midst of those lions? I don't know how many was in there. You know, the reason I did this lesson is because I saw on Facebook a few days ago. You know, it kind of led me to this question: how do we react with the lions that are in our life? How do we react to the fiery furnace that is in our life? Is there not trouble and things that come our way that are really a struggle and hard? How do we react to COVID, or sicknesses, or cancer, or tornadoes, or hurricanes? You know, I think Daniel, we look at Daniel, we look at Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. It don't matter whether COVID was here, tornadoes, hurricanes, cancer, I don't care what they had. They would have bowed down and worshiped their God like they did before. Here's a few key verses as we look back through the story. You know, here in Daniel 3:17 and 18, it says, these are in NIV. I don't only read NIV, but they were readily available. If we are thrown into a blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it. And he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set. You know, it don't matter whether they got killed or whether they're saved or not. They don't care. But they were not going to worship the gods of King Nebuchadnezzar, King Darius. Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like the Son of God. Daniel 3:25. Look how much trust they put in God to defy the king's command. Daniel 3:28. Rather than serving and worshiping any God except their own God. They were not going to worship any other God but the God that saved them. Look at Daniel 6. When you think of Daniel and his life, Daniel 6:4 says they could find no corruption in Daniel because he was trustworthy. He wasn't corrupt or negligent. He was a godly man. They couldn't find anything wrong with him. And sometimes today, people look at us like that. They try to make us look bad or whatever as we live our life as a Christian. Look at Daniel 6:10 and 11. It says, "Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before." You know, if we run into some kind of struggle in our life, will we still be that faithful to God? A few lessons I thought we could kind of go over as we end the lesson. You know, disciples of God, we can't avoid persecution. We're going to have persecution. We're going to suffer many things. You know, some even will be jealous if we take a stand for our God. Some even might resent it. But we can't change what others feel about us. And we can't be displeasing to God because we want to flatter somebody else or we're going through some persecution. What happened when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel was given an ultimatum that they needed to worship this idol or worship the king? Is that not an example that we need to look at as we think about Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach? When you think about people that stood, I mean, through the Bible, you can just people that have faith and stand strong. Think of Jesus. As he stood before Pilate, talked to Pilate, and as he stood before the high priest. Think about Stephen before he was martyred, before he was stoned. All through the Bible, we see people that stand up for what they believe. They stand up for God. Our faith should be in both God's power and God's will. We don't serve Him just because He will deliver us. He is able to deliver us. We need to be willing to lay down our lives rather than betray our God. We can't go around, no matter what happens in our life, we cannot betray our God. I think this, when you think about whenever Jesus said, "Take up your cross and follow me," is that not what He's talking about? Take up your cross and follow me. You could say that about Stephen. You could say that about Daniel and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego who lived after Christ. You could definitely say that about them. As we end our lesson, I want us to think about this verse in Hebrews 11:33. You know, when you think about this chapter 11, it's known as the Hall of the Fame of the Faithful. You see lots of names written here in Hebrews. But how does our faith compare to these people? How does our faith compare to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? How does our faith compare to Daniel? You know, why did Abel offer a more excellent sacrifice? Why was Enoch translated so he did not die? Why did Noah build an ark? Why did Abraham leave his country? Why did Abraham offer his son or was going to? Why was Moses hid and become Pharaoh's daughter? Why did Moses leave Egypt? How did the walls of Jericho fall? You know, faith. All this is in Hebrews 11. Faith. Look at Hebrews 11:33. There, starting in 32, it says, "And what shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon." Think of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel, and there's prophet after prophet after prophet of their faith, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of the weaknesses were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to fight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead, raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. Why did they do all these things? Because they wanted to be resurrected with God and be with Him. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, they were slain with a sword, they wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, and being destitute and afflicted and tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and in caves of the earth. You think we suffer today? Look at these people that had so much faith. Look at Hebrews 11:13. It says, "These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off." And being in these people they spoke of here, being in the Old Testament, they didn't have Christ. They were going to have Christ when He came. They could see Christ afar off and were persuaded of Him and embraced Him and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better country, that is a heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He hath prepared for them a city. You know, this strong faith that we see in all these people, we need to have it. Grab a hold of it. Live our life with faith like Abraham and Moses and Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. I saw this quote. It says, "Faith enables us to rise above many things that would otherwise defeat us." Faith allowed Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego to rise above everything. Sure they did. The questions we kind of started with: where are we looking? Who are we depending on? Do we depend on ourselves? Do we depend on someone else, the government? Are we trying to play our bank account? Why aren't we looking to God to help us through life? Look at Hebrews 4:14. "Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed into the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our profession. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted, like as we are, yet without sin." When we think about all these people that had faith, Jesus was tempted the same way. He knows our struggles. He knows what kind of problems we're having in life. "Let us therefore come boldly into the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace in the help of time of need." When we need God, why don't we call out to Him? Why don't we pray to Him? Why don't we talk to Him? Hebrews 12:1-2. "Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of God." Christ is there. He's been here. He's fighting for us. Look to him. I want to finish with Matthew 10 and starting in verse 27. But I tell you, in the darkness speak ye in the light, and what ye hear in the ear proclaim upon the housetops. And be not afraid of them that kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them shall fall on the ground without your Father, but the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, ye are more value than many sparrows. Every one, therefore, who shall confess me before men, him will I also confess before my Father who is in heaven. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father who is in heaven. You have faith, the faith of Daniel, the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the faith that will confess Jesus Christ as the Son of God with your friends, with your family, with your people at work. It doesn't matter. Confess that Jesus is the Christ. Tell people about it. Maybe it is today that your faith has been lacking. You would like us to pray for you. We would love to do that and take care of that. Maybe it is today that you need to be baptized for remission of sins. We can also take care of that as well. We come as we stand as we sing.